Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Kilayim, Chapter 7, Halacha 1 in the ArtScroll run 61a2. Chapter 7 is about something called layering, and basically what that is you're going to take the branch of something, and you are going, normally grapevine, you are going to take your existing vine, you're going to bend it into the ground, you are going to bury part of that branch, and you are going to continue that up where it is going to be covered with ground. And then the part that comes up, that is going to be what is going to be a new shoot. And then what happens is you are going to wait until the buried part of the branch starts to make roots, and then you are going to cut the part of the branch that first gets buried, and then your grapevine will spring back into place, and under the ground there will be a new root system and a new shoot that you set up to come out of the ground. In other words, let's say you have a 15-foot grapevine, and grapevines can get to be pretty long. What you're doing is you are taking part of it and putting it under the ground, and that, by the way, where it comes under the ground, that's where you're going to cut from to put your original system back. That's going to be your original plant. And now what's going to happen is that part that comes under the ground, that is going to be the formation of the new root system. And then the part that comes up, which was part of the original branch, that is going to be the propagation of a new plant. Now, the word here is going to have a connection with the word bracha. And the idea in Masechet Orla, Rabbi Yochanan says that everywhere it's talking about layering in Masechet Orla, it's being done as bracha, okay? And there's a connection with mivarech, mavrich, and bracha, right? Because there's similarities in the letters, and it's depending on how you're doing valuation. So instead of saying ma bricha or ma brich, you could read it as mi bracha and vowelize it like that. And that's, I think, the point of Rabbi Yochanan in Masechet Orla. And the idea is that you can take something you already have and you can start to generate new plants with it. The idea is that we're living in a universe where Hashem is always creating things new and always doing things for blessing and always doing things with mercy and always continuously running the universe. And part of all of the ideas of Kilayim has to do with Hashem's dominion over the species, both plants and animals, and the continuous running of the world. Now, we have the idea of bracha, and there's a lot of Kabbalistic things in the word bracha where when you look at the bet, that is going to be a 2. And then when you look at the next sets of letters, they start to double. And it's this doubling of doubling of doubling. And that is going to be the idea of bracha. And by the way, the same concept comes up in the word siyum. According to the Vilna Goan, the idea is that bracha and siyums are connected and that there are missing letters between these that are going to be what would have been doubled, and then the existing letters that you have in, say, the word siyum or bracha are going to be the ones that were doubled. And again, Rabbi Yochanan in Masechet Orla is talking about this concept of layering as a thing to generate new things and to get new bracha. Why? Because you can propagate new plants. By the way, those new plants, once you cut them, they will be subject to a new Orla cycle. But here, the question is, once you start to propagate new vines, are these going to be subject to where they are going to combine with the old vines to start connecting to make vineyards? In other words, let's say I have 3 vines, and this is going to be coming up later on in the sugya, and I layer the 3 vines over, and then I cut them. And the question is, are these 3 vines that I had going to combine with the 3 new vines that I just propagated and created a new root system for? The answer is they will, depending on how far they are, using all of the criteria we've already learned for distancing. But the point is, that will now make something like Bet Hillel's new vineyard system, or vineyard, right? What will qualify for Bet Hillel's vineyard. Now, there's a lot of agadic things going on with layering. And again, it's this idea of Hashem creating a generative universe that keeps creating with blessing, and that Hashem is always in control and always has total mastery over the world. And the Mishnah starts off saying that if one layered a grapevine into the ground, if there are not 3 tefachim of earth up above it, then he may not introduce foreign seed directly above it. So what we covered before is that there has to at least be 3 tefachim of earth whenever you're planting something, in order for it to count like a different domain. And we already covered this before, that there are going to be like different layers on a farm. Some are going to be for underground, some are going to be above ground. And what we saw before was that with this root system of matter, which is going to be used for dyes, that you can have that as a crop underground. And the root system they just care about the roots, and the root system is just there, and they don't care about whatever comes above it. And you can have also, even very close by, other plants like grain. And why? Because you're going to be harvesting the grain above earth, and you're going to be harvesting what you want, below 3 tefachim under the ground for the matter, for this root system that you only desire the root system to make the dyes out of. And the idea here is that, these are going to be layered, no pun intended, but layered with different uses on the farm itself. One is going to be ground level, one is going to be under earth. And in order to count as a different domain, it has to be at least with 3 tefachim of earth above it. And what we're going to be getting into later in the Gemara is that planting foreign seed directly above a buried branch is going to be forbidden. So you'd say, like, well, why can't I just do it like 2 tefachim? That's going to be like 2 handbreadths, is pretty deep. And the idea is that the roots of another species that is above it is liable to go straight, up and down. Normally, plants, as we've been learning, have root systems that more or less, or like grain and things like that, normally have root systems that go straight down. Things like lettuce have root systems that go down, doesn't necessarily go out so much. And the worry is that this other species is going to penetrate into the vineyard branch that was layered, and now it's going to be a grafting of a plant onto a tree, or to the side of this buried branch. Now, the idea is that if you're putting it down deep enough, then the roots of the foreign seed are going to go straight down, and they will not penetrate the branch because you have it down deep enough that some of these vegetables and things like that won't be able to penetrate through. And again, this is all dealing with we've bent over and we've created this knee and this layering where it's like we've created this N shape. N as in Nancy, and instead of having these like sharp edges on this end, we have smoothed over shapes on this end. And again, we are putting part of it, part of it's above ground, and we're putting part of it underground and pulling it back above ground again. And the worry is that in this part that's under the ground, not to put anything over it, because it's liable to get root systems to go into this and to create grafting. And there is going to be a qualification on that. And it's going to say, even if he layered it within a gourd or a pipe, so in other words, that you took the dried out gourd where you're trying to take that and make it like a pipe, or use it like piping, and encase the vine into it and then bury it into the ground. And the Mishnah is teaching that even if the branch was layered through a pipe or a piece of pipe or gourd that was dried out and used as a piece of pipe, that you still can't plant foreign seed above it if it's going to be less than 3 tefachim below the surface. And that's going to be because the roots of the other species could penetrate the pipe or the gourd and go into the branch and make grafting. And the Mishnah continues and says, if, however, he layered it within a rock, even if there's only 3 finger breadths of earth above it, he is permitted to introduce foreign seed directly above it. So this is going to be the type of solid rock that is not going to crumble. We're going to see that later in the Gemara, that what happens if you have a piece of rock that is liable to crumble. Well, sandstone is like that. Sandstone will crumble, and it's easy for roots to go into something like sandstone. But what if you have something like Jerusalem stone, which you can find all around the Jerusalem hills and in the forest here? Well, unlikely that roots are going to be going into that. That stuff is pretty, no pun intended, rock solid. Sorry about that. The pun is the lowest form of humor, but that is a very dense stone, and they use it for buildings because it is a dense stone. It keeps out water and moisture here in Jerusalem. And the idea is that if you put even, this kind of heavy Jerusalem stone and you layered the vine underneath, and you only even had 3 finger breadths of earth there, could you plant something within these 3 finger breadths? You could, according to the Mishnah. But again, that is going to be where there's no risk of grafting going on between the roots of this other seed and the branch. The Mishnah continues, and it says that if there is a knee in the grapevine, we do not measure its work area other than from the second trunk. In other words, we know that you've grafted this, you've layered this so that you can set up a new propagation of plants. And where are you going to be measuring now? Well, once this gets layered, there's an opinion that roots will start to form after a few days. And so already this is starting to get a new root system. Now, in Masechet Orlah, when it's getting into the categories in chapter 2 about layering, well, we always go by the root ball of the main plant. So we're going to look at the root ball of the main vine, and once you cut the vine and you separated it out into 2 different root balls, well, the new one is going to be subject to Orlah because that has the new root ball. But here in Kilayim, where are we going to measure the work areas? Well, we're going to look at the measurement of, let's say you have 3 vines and you're layering for 3 vines. You're going to look at measuring from the first trunk that you originally had, and then you're going to measure from this new one that started to take root after a few days. So the Gemara is going to draw an inference from the Mishnah's initial ruling about planting with at least 3 tefachim of earth upon it. And he says that he may not introduce foreign seed directly above it. And this applies that anywhere to the side of the layered branch, it is permitted to plant foreign seed. We've been learning that, hey, if you have an individual vine, you have to do a setback of 6 tefachim. And now you say, wait a second, I just layered part of this branch into the ground. And now I know that there's a branch under the ground before it re-enters and re-emerges out of the ground. And the brilliancy here is to say, wait a second, I know that I have to separate between the grapevine 6 tefachim for a work area. Now, the Mishnah is saying, how far is this submerged area? It's going to be 3 tefachim. And so it's going to basically be saying, wait a second, I know the work area for an individual vine is 6 tefachim, not 3 tefachim. So how could it be that you have the distance now between this buried part of the vine and only 3 tefachim instead of 6 tefachim for a setback that which we've been learning about? And the Gemara is going to reject this approach ultimately and explain why this is going to be buried at this distance. But still, this is a brilliancy about setbacks. And the Gemara says, with what prohibition are we dealing with here when the Mishnah is forbidding planting foreign seed directly above the layered branch that is covered by less than 3 tefachim of earth? Again, the setbacks are going to be 6 tefachim for an individual branch, and I know, or a vine, and I know that under here is going to be this vine. Why aren't I setting it back 6 tefachim? The Gemara says, if the Mishnah forbids it because the roots of the foreign seed will penetrate into the layered branch and result in a grafting of a plant onto a tree, then why do I need the Mishnah, says this Gemara, to specify the case of the layered grapevine? Well, the Gemara is going to point out that this prohibition should have been applicable even in cases involving a layered branch of any other kind of tree. In other words, unlike Kilayim, this should apply also in cases involving other kinds of plants. And we know that from the cases of layering that's talked about in Masechet Orla, this can apply to other kinds of trees as well. And if we're going to assume that it's on account of grafting and the worry that the roots of something planted above it will penetrate in and graft, why doesn't the Mishnah also say, well, you can't do it on anything? And the Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah is talking about just the layered grapevine. What's going to be the difference between the grapevine and any other kind of tree that's going to forbid this kind of action? In other words, if I have a walnut tree and I'm trying to take the branches and bend them down in to create and propagate a new walnut tree, and I'm doing the same sort of procedure for like a sapling, well, why can't I also plant directly underneath there? What's going to be the issue? Because again, your worry is that you're going to be grafting because whatever you're putting above it is going to penetrate in. That's going to be the worry. So why is it that we're talking about any kind of we're not talking about any kind of tree. We're just talking about the grapevine. What's going to be the difference? And the Gemara is going to say, again, I think this is the brilliancy, that if the Mishnah is forbidding planting foreign seed directly above the layered branch because of the restriction of planting within the work area of the individual grapevine, then the Mishnah should have taught that the branch needs to be covered by 6 tefachim of earth in order to be planted directly above it. In other words, we see here that, wait a second, we have grapevines. We know that there has to be 6 tefachim of setbacks. We know that there's a buried vine under here. Why can't I just say that the area between the vine that is buried and the top of the earth is like a work area, and I have to separate between that at least 6 tefachim as well? In other words, I'm going to separate between this branch, and I'm going to separate between, or this trunk, and I'm going to separate between this trunk 6 tefachim, but I know there's part of that trunk is going to be buried. Why don't I also allot for a 6 tefachim space between that branch and the top of the earth? Why only 3? And basically, the Gemara is trying to, the Gemara is going to try to ask, why is this Mishnah limiting the prohibition to instances where are there going to be less than 3 tefachim of earth above the layered branch? And the Gemara is going to propose a solution. It's going to say, rather, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva said that the work area of an individual vine is 3 tefachim. Now, we covered this before, and Rabbi Akiva was saying that it is 3 tefachim outside of Eretz Yisrael, and inside of Eretz Yisrael it's going to be 6 tefachim, and the Mishnah is teaching that the layer vine is subject to the same work area as a regular individual grapevine, but again, it's 3 tefachim. That's Rabbi Akiva's view, and so if we're looking at a buried vine, maybe it's saying it has to be covered with 3 tefachim of earth before you plant foreign seed above it, because it's taking Rabbi Akiva's view of saying, well, what's a work area? And I know part of this trunk is buried, and between this trunk and the top is going to be 3 tefachim, and that's like a work area, and that's going to accord with Rabbi Akiva. And the question is, if you're looking at Rabbi Akiva's view, he's basically saying that the individual vine and this 3 tefach work area is going to extend in all directions, so that even if you took part of this trunk and put it underground, there's going to be a work area there, still a work area there, because there's a trunk. Where's the work area? It's going to run horizontally or vertically instead of horizontally. Before, we were dealing with work areas that run along the side of the ground, but now part of this trunk is going to run east-west sort of way as it comes under the ground before it you have it reemerge. And in that part that's buried, Rabbi Akiva is basically going to be holding that you have to have a work area there as well. But the Gemara is going to reject this approach, and the idea is that if the Mishnah's prohibition really is based on this presumption that there's a 3 tefach work area surrounding all parts of the trunk, even the layered branch that's buried under the ground, then in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah should have taught that one may not plant foreign seed even to the side of the layer branch unless there's 3 tefachim between it. So in other words, this is not really going to be a Mishnah going according to Rabbi Akiva because it would have been worded differently. And again, what do we do with the side of the trunk, right? We know that part of it is running underground. And in reality, the Mishnah does not prohibit planting to the side of the branch. And this is basically saying that, and it's basically asking, why does the Mishnah forbid planting seed directly above a layered grapevine? And, we basically dispel the idea that it's because there's going to be a work area issue, like everything we've been covering in the past, 6 chapters. So what's going on here that is going to make it different for a grapevine and another tree? What's going to be different with this versus work areas? And the Gemara is going to answer it. Rabbi Yirmiyah says in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba that actually the Mishnah forbids planting seed above the layered branch because the roots will penetrate the branch and result in the grafting of a plant onto a grapevine. Why does it say grapevine? Because the grapevine is going to be more fragile and the bark is going to be more fragile. It's going to be easier for roots to penetrate that than, say, another kind of tree. And so basically the roots of a foreign seed, if it's going to grow straight down without extending sideways, then really what could happen is a grafting can take place. But if you're using another kind of tree, the grafting wouldn't take place because that kind of branch that would be buried would be more resilient to that. But there's something more soft and fragile about the grapevine than another kind of tree. And by the way, the grapevine is a vine, but it has the halachic characteristics of a tree. And other trees are not like that. And so one of the oddball things about the grapevine is that, yes, it has halachic characteristics of a tree, but it also has something more vegetable-like, where it has it has bark, but this vine can easily be penetrated by other plants. And that's what's going to make it problematic. In other words, what this is pointing out is the oddball nature of the grapevine versus other trees. Now, the idea is that what about, seeds that, do not spread out horizontally and that the seeds are going to go up and down? And we learned in a Mishnah over in Baba Batra 2:1, 17a in the Bavli that we must distance the planting of seeds and use a plow and pouring urine from at least 3 tefachim from a wall of a neighbor. Here we are back to 3 tefachim. Now, what's the idea about planting seeds next to a wall for your neighbor, or pouring urine or urinating on the side of a wall, or which is not good behavior? And also, what's wrong with plowing there? Are you actually going to be destroying the wall? Well, we're going to get into that. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says in this Gemara, Rabbi Chama bar Ukva, when studying that Mishnah, asked the following contradiction. It says there, in the Mishnah in Kilayim, which is the Mishnah we're talking about now, you say that the roots of planted seeds do not travel sideways. Oh, sorry, that's the Mishnah in the Mishnah in Baba Batra, and when he's talking about the Mishnah here, he's talking about the Mishnah in also Baba Batra, and you say that the roots of planted seeds do not travel sideways, whereas here in Masechet Baba Batra, you're going to say that the roots of planted seeds do travel sideways. What's going to be the deal? Because it looks like, on one side you're saying that the roots don't travel sideways, so why separate it at all? What's the problem? And it looks like a contradiction. But really, there's not a contradiction. Rabbi Yossi is going to explain that both Mishnahs here and here are going to agree that roots normally do not travel sideways. Although, by the way, as an aside, for the madder plant, they do. But over here, most plants really don't have root systems that spread out Again, trees do, but we're talking about vegetables or grain or something like that. Most of them are going to create a ball underneath the plant. And the Gemara is going to continue. And, it says that, the reason that the Mishnah in Baba Batra forbids planting seeds near a wall is that the roots are going to cause the earth beneath the seeds to loosen. And that's going to damage the wall's foundation, even from a distance. In other words, the roots are going to tunnel downward and loosen the earth going down. And that's going to cause the earth supporting the wall to shift sideways a little bit. And that's going to be the insight by the Rosh Cirilio to explain it. And the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say that you should know that this is so, because we learned in the Mishnah in Baba Batra that urine must also be distanced from a neighbor's wall at least 3 tefachim. And, also, is that going to have the same question? In other words, the Gemara asks, does urine poured within 3 tefachim travel sideways? Does it reach the wall? It certainly doesn't. The point of not putting something that's corrosive as urine there is that you are going to break down and loosen the rock or whatever ground is there, and as a result, you're going to damage the earth surrounding the wall's foundation, and you're going to make it break down. And it's a lot like how sapping would work. When they had these giant castles, they would bury underneath and sap to try to weaken the walls to get the walls to collapse. Now, what about with plowing? I mean, certainly, how would plowing, affect it? We don't see a plow going sideways into the wall. It has a setback. So Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Bon, objects and says, we learn in the Mishnah there that a plow must also be distanced 3 tefachim for a wall. Now, is it possible to say, says this Gemara, that a plow would travel sideways and cause direct damage to the wall? No. Really what you're doing is you're undermining and loosening the earth beneath the plow that would ultimately cause the wall's foundation to become weakened. And, what this is trying to say is that, the roots of the seeds would travel, if they were to travel sideways, yes, that would directly damage the wall. But the idea is that normally seeds are going to go down, again, not for a tree, but for other kinds of plants like vegetables and grain. And just like you're having to distance between a wall for plowing to not break down and weaken the foundation, there also should be a thing about, with how the root systems are going to work and, not breaking down other things. And again, the separations for all of these things is going to be 3 tefachim. So we see also a similarity between 3 tefachim as well for this layered branch. Now, the Mishnah is going to be stating that the next part, which is that if somebody layered a grapevine in the ground and there are not 3 tefachim of earth upon it or above it, that he may not introduce a foreign seed above it, even if it is layered within a gourd or a pipe. And the Gemara is going to qualify that. It's going to say, this is stated with regard to an earthenware pipe. Why? Because, like a clay pot pipe or pottery, well, it'll break down and roots can go through it. If you have ever seen older pots with plants in it, it will eventually, come in and break up the bottom parts of the pipe or the pot. So the Gemara says, but with regard to a lead pipe, which certainly roots can't go through a lead pipe, it is not necessary for there to be 3 tefachim of earth above it because the roots can never go through the lead pipe. The Gemara gets on to the next clause of the Mishnah. It says, if, however, he layered the vine within a rock, even if there's only 3 fingers breadths of earth above it, he is permitted to introduce foreign seed directly above it. Gemara qualifies that ruling and says that was stated with regard to a casing of solid rock. But with regards to brittle rock that can crumble, when the idea is that when the roots get into the brittle rock, it's going to break it down. And if you had solid rock like Jerusalem stone can't be penetrated by roots, but the brittle rock can be. And what this is trying to do is this is trying to say, really what is the idea? The idea is that we want to protect this fragile vine, and we don't want accidental grafting to come into it. And part of the issue is that grafting is going to be a deraita obligation, so it's going to be ruled always to be strict. So only in the cases where it's encased by something that is impossible for other roots to penetrate is it going to be allowed. And in any other case where it could happen, because it's deraita and we're always going to be ruling strict on something that's deraita, especially as a fence, we're not going to allow it. So the Gemara talks about the next part, and it says that if there's a knee in the grapevine, we do not measure the work area from the second, other than from the second trunk. So why is this in here? Well, we have part of the branch, part of the vine is buried. And so, again, this is to go back to what we were talking about with like Rabbi Akiva. And to say, well, I know that there's a vine there. I know it's running laterally underneath the ground before it reemerges. Why can't I measure a 6 tefach area from there? Why can't I measure a work area from there? And that, by the way, would be where if you did, you wouldn't be able to plant there above there at all, because you would say, well, maybe only if I had 7 tefachim, right? But what this is trying to do is just trying to dispel, that possibility. It's just saying, look, you measure from where the original vine branch is, the original trunk, and you measure from where you're having the new trunk emerge. You measure from there, but all the area that's submerged that has a vine there, you're not measuring from. Why would that be? Well, again, that would preclude everything that we've been talking about, being able to plant within that space between this individual vine and that individual vine. So what would that do, right? If you were able to say, oh, the vine that's buried, I'm going to create a work area there, well, you're taking away possible growing area, because again, now you only have 2 individual vines. You have the original grapevine, you have the new grapevine that you've propagated. And there's no problem if you're separated from 6 tefachim over from the first vine and the second vine, another 6 tefachim, then you have a greater space than that. You can plant a little strip in there, and you're taking away something that you can possibly plant. And that's not the halacha. But if we are saying, look, disregard the branch that is buried under the ground, that doesn't count for work area. The only place you measure work areas from is where the branches, the vines, are going to be emerging above the ground. That is what this is teaching, and that is important because, again, if you do it where you're measuring the submerged plant, you can be taking away farmland from somebody. So the Gemara is going to say that this applies only when the first trunk is visible above the ground, and if the first trunk was visible above the ground, one must leave 6 tefachim surrounding the first trunk, as well as 6 tefachim surrounding the second trunk. And again, you're not measuring from the part under the ground. You're measuring from the trunks. And so if you created a new second trunk, you're going to measure from that second trunk as well as the first trunk. The Gemara now is going to give another distinction. It's going to say that you should know that this is so, and we learned in our Mishnah, another Mishnah that follows ours. This, by the way, is going to be in chapter 7, Halacha 2 of Kilayim coming up. And says that if one layered the branches of 3 grapevines, creating an additional 3 vine row, and their trunks are visible, Rabbi Lazar, son of Rabbi Tzadok, says that if there are 4 amos up to 8 amos between the parents and the offshoots, they're going to combine. Again, this gets back with traditional stuff that we've been working on the past 4 chapters. And basically, we've learned over in the Mishnah in 4.6 and in 5.2 that in order for 2 rows of vines to combine to make a vineyard and be subject to the 4 amma work area where planting is forbidden, the rows have to be separated by at least 4 amos. And really, what this is saying is that before you had 3 vines, and now you're going to try to create another vineyard that has, or another row of 3 vines, that's 6 vines. So that's going to have the halachic characteristic of a small vineyard. It's going to fit Bet Hillel's vineyard of 2 and 3. So we can draw a tail in many different places. Yes, it's 3 and 3, but we can draw a tail there. And there's a lot of different ways to configure that. And the idea is that, like any other vineyard, when you're separating between one vine and another, it has to have at least 4 amos between one vine and another. And what this is saying is that, are these going to combine if you have these reemerge? And these are going to be from the first vine to the new second vine, 4 amos? Yes. And if these were planted as 3 vines, and these are now, 4 amos from, the original vines to, the next original vine to the next original vine, like what a normal vineyard would be, these are not going to have the characteristics now of an individual set of vines. These are now going to have the characteristics of a small vineyard. So again, you now took 3 individual vines and you turned it into the halachic characteristic of a small vineyard that has all of the characteristics of Bet Hillel's vineyard. And yes, it is a halachic d'oraita vineyard. Now, the Bryce is teaching that concerning this ruling, Rabbi Tzadok, in what regard are these words with Rabbi Lazar, son of Rabbi Tzadok, stating that the offshoots do not combine with the parent plant unless there are between them, 4 amos. So only in regard to forming a new vineyard. Now, the idea is that, if you have this separated out like a vineyard between the original 3 vines and then the new 3 vines, and that you have separations between all the vines, 4 amos, is it going to take on the characteristics of a vineyard? Yes. Why? Because that is what a vineyard is. So when you've propagated it, and what we're learning here is if you're propagating it like that, then you've created a new vineyard. The Gemara says, but in regard to a 6 tefach work area, that's going to be dealing, by the way, with the individual vines. One must, in all instances, leave 6 tefachim here surrounding the offshoots, as well as 6 tefachim surrounding the parent vines. So what we can see from this baraisa is that in the case of the knee-shaped grapevine, where the main trunk is visible, and you have the first trunk and the second trunk that emerges out of the ground, that's going to be subject to a 6 tefach area. And when we're talking about the one that is going to be 6 tefach versus 4 tefach, again, the idea is, did you make this new layering conform with the halachic characteristics of the small vineyard, or didn't you? So we know what's going to happen. They're going to cut the original vine that was planted, and it's going to spring back into place. And what's going to be buried there? It's going to be the part that took root and the new trunk. That's what's going to be buried there. So where are you going to distance from? Well, if you didn't do the setbacks right, and you didn't make between the first trunk and the second trunk 4 amos, then that's not going to have the halachic characteristics of a vineyard. And what's going to happen is on those 6 vines, it's just going to be a collection of 6 individual vines. What's going to be the setbacks of it? If you didn't do it right, what this Bryce is teaching is that your setbacks are going to be 6 tefachim because it has the characteristics of individual vines. It doesn't have the characteristics of a small vineyard or of any vineyard. So the idea is that when you're layering it, if you're doing it to fit the spacing that we've been learning that fits the halachic characteristics of a vineyard, it's going to have setbacks of 4 amos like a regular vineyard. And if you didn't do the setbacks right, and you didn't do the spacing right, and you did it, say, less than 4 amos between one vine and another, then these are not going to, yes, there's 6 vines, but these didn't qualify as a vineyard. These qualified as individual vines. And the setback between this new trunk and the old trunk and the other sets of 4 trunks that are there to make up the 6 are only going to count as individual vines. And in Halacha 2, we're going to get into more about layering grapevines. This all matters because, you go around Jerusalem Hills, there are a lot of vineyards here, and we're learning the details of what is a vineyard and what isn't. Have a great day.